Hello and welcome back to my channel. It has been a minute, so it feels so good to be sitting here in front of you once again. I hope that you have been well. Not often do I come across material that I feel no need to add my own commentary in, but Dr. James Dobson's material is so well packaged and presented that I feel in this instance it may be a hindrance if I did such. Not to mention his method of explaining and breaking down concepts feels so familiar to me and how I would naturally present a topic. So 99% of what I share here today, aside from my own experiences and commentary obviously, is going to be direct sound bites from Dr. Dobson's book. In fact, I will be reading segments from one chapter of his book today to be able to present you with the long-awaited solution that you need, which is why you clicked on this video, on how to stop being the angry parent regularly experiencing verbal and physical outbursts when it comes to dealing with your children. And God desires that you would receive that answer today. So these are not original thoughts or ideas. These come from Dr. Dobson's years of experience, dedication, and the revelation the Lord has given him in the arena of child rearing, to grow up to be not only pleasant additions, members of the family, but wonderful assets to society in the kingdom of God. And I want to share this. We know that the way the world is set up today, it's convinced us that if we are not the expert on a subject or hold the expertise on something, we've been made to believe that we present no value in that area. But that is such a lie. And God has led me to understand the power of an effective guide. It's almost just as important, if you can't be the expert on a subject with the solutions, to be the guide who can effectively usher people into the solution or be a conduit. So with that understanding, I confidently lay before you the expertise of Dr. James Dobson. Through his book, The Strong-Willed Child, the Revised Version, and we will be studying today chapter 6, which he titled The Common Mistake. I hope that gives you an indication that though the enemy has been causing you to feel down and out concerning your approach to your children, you are not alone and you're not the only one facing these circumstances. And God has went before you and presented the solution through wonderful men like Dr. Dobson and other people in the world who walk the walk that you've walked and come out better and brighter on the other side, and their children as well for it. So let's get straight into it. Before we enter into what is the solution to get our children to hear us, obey and listen to our commands without becoming angry, irritated, or flustered completely, we have to get into the concept of what causes us to obey. This section from his book, I've affectionately dubbed The Police Officer and the Judge. Take a listen. In our discussion of Jake and his family, I said that trying to control children by displays of anger and verbal outbursts is the most ineffective approach to management. It not only doesn't work, but it actually makes things worse. Researchers at the University of Washington, Dr. Susan Spiker and colleagues found that parents who attempt to control their children by yelling and insulting them are likely to cause even more disruptive and defiant behavior. It makes sense, doesn't it? If you yell at your kids, they will yell back at you and more. Furthermore, there is an interactive effect. As the child becomes more rebellious, the parent becomes even more angrier. Unfortunately, when frustrated, most adults fall into precisely that pattern of parenting. Educators often make the same mistake. I once heard a teacher say on national television, "I like being a professional educator, but I hate the daily task of teaching. My children are so unruly that I have to stay mad at them all the time just to control the classroom." How utterly demoralizing to be required to be mean and bad-tempered day in and day out to keep kids from going wild. Yet many teachers and parents know of no other way to make them obey. Believe me, it is exhausting and counterproductive. Let's look at why anger doesn't work. Consider your own motivational system. Suppose you're driving home from work one afternoon, exceeding the speed limit by 40 miles per hour. A police officer is standing on the corner, but there isn't much he can do in response. He has no car, no motorcycle, no badge, no gun, and no authority to write tickets. All he can do is scream insults at you and shake his fist as you pass. Would that cause you to slow down? Of course not. You might smile and wave as you hurry by. The officer's anger only emphasizes his impotence. In other words, his inability to do anything. On the other hand, imagine yourself tearing through a school zone one morning on the way to the office. You suddenly look in the rearview mirror and see a black and white squad car bearing down on you from behind. 8 red lights are flashing and the siren is screaming. The officer uses his loudspeaker to tell you to pull over to the curb. When you have stopped, he opens his door and approaches your window. He's 6'9", has a voice like the Lone Ranger's, and wears a big gun on his hip. His badge is gleaming in the light. He's carrying a little leather-bound book of citations that you've seen before last month. The officer speaks politely but firmly. Sir, I have you on radar traveling 65 miles per hour in a 20 mile per hour zone. May I see your driver's license, please? The officer doesn't scream, cry, or criticize you. He doesn't have to. You become putty behind the wheel. You fumble nervously to locate the small plastic card in your wallet, the one with the picture you hate. Your hands get sweaty and your mouth is dry as a bone. Your heart pounds like crazy in your throat. Why are you so breathless? It is because the course of action that the police officer is about to take is notoriously unpleasant. It will dramatically affect your future driving habits, or if you do not change, even cause you to do a lot of walking in the days ahead. 6 weeks later, you go before a judge to learn your fate. He's wearing a black robe and sits high above the courtroom. Again, you are a nervous wreck, not because the judge yells at you or calls you names, but because he has the power to make your day a little more unpleasant. Neither the police officer nor the judge need to rely on anger to influence your behavior. They have far more effective methods of getting your attention. Their serenity and confidence are part of the aura of authority that creates respect. But what if they fail to understand that and begin to cry and complain? What if one of them says, I don't know why you won't drive right. We told you over and over that you don't break the law like this. You just continue to disobey no matter what. We do. Then getting red in the face, he adds, well, I'll tell you this, young man. We're not going to take this anymore. Do you hear? Believe me, you're going to regret this. I'm sure you get the point. Anger does not influence behavior unless it implies that something irritating is about to happen. By contrast, disciplinary action does cause behavior to change. Not only does anger not work, I'm convinced that it produces a destructive kind of disrespect in the minds of our children. They perceive that our frustration is caused by our inability to control the situation. We represent justice to them. Yet we're on the verge of tears as we flail the air with our hands and shout empty threats and warnings. Anger does not work when it comes to our children. We represent authority to them, and it's our disciplinary actions, the impending action that follows whenever they disobey or break a rule, that causes not only us adults to obey, but children when we implement that effectively and repeatedly and consistently. And so in this next segment, we're going to go straight to the answer of what does get children to obey. And understanding deeper, Dr. Dobson is going to present to us the solution and also how closely anger seems to be related to the solution, and how we oftentimes can confuse being angry with the reason why our children listen through this passage that I'm affectionately calling Henry and his mom. Take a listen. Let me give you another illustration that may be helpful. It will represent any one of 20 million homes on a typical evening. Henry is in the 2nd grade in a constant whirlwind of activity. He's been wiggling and giggling since he got up that morning. But incredibly, he still has excess energy that needs to be burned. His mom is not on the same condition. She's been on her feet since staggering out of bed at 5:30 a.m. She fixed breakfast for the family, cleaned up the mess, got dad off to work, sent Henry to school, and if she's employed, dropped off the younger kids at a daycare center and rushed off to work. Or if she's a stay-at-home mom, she's settled into a long day of trying to keep the preschoolers from killing each other. By late afternoon, she's put in 9 hours of work without rest. Toddlers don't take breaks unless they're nappers, so why should their mothers? Despite mom's fatigue, she can hardly call it a day. Dad comes home from work and tries to help, but he is tired too. Mom still has at least 6 hours of work left to do, including grocery shopping, cooking dinner, giving baths to little ones, changing their diapers, tucking them into bed, and helping Henry with his homework. I get depressed just thinking about such weary moms still working as the day draws to a close. Henry is not so sympathetic, however, and arrives home from school in a decidedly mischievous mood. He can't find anything interesting to do, so he begins to irritate his uptight mother. He teases his little sister to the point of tears, pulls the cat's tail, and spills the dog's water. Mom is nagging by this time, but Henry acts like he doesn't notice. Then he goes to the toy closet and begins tossing out games and boxes of plastic toys and dumping out enough building blocks to construct a small city. Mom knows that someone is going to have to clean up all that mess, and she has a vague notion about who will get that assignment. The intensity of her voice is rising again. She orders him to the bathroom to wash his hands in preparation for dinner. Henry is gone for 15 minutes. When he returns, his hands are still dirty. Mom's pulse is pounding through her arteries by this time, and there's a definite migraine sensation above her left eye. Does this sound familiar? Finally, Henry's bedtime arrives, but he does not want to go to bed, and he knows it will take his harassed mother at least 30 minutes to get him there. Henry does not do anything against his wishes unless his mother becomes very angry and blows up at him. Henry's sitting on the floor playing with his games. Mom looks at her watch and says, "Henry, it's nearly 8 o'clock, a 30-minute exaggeration. So gather up your toys and go take your bath." Now, Henry and Mom both know that she didn't mean for him to immediately take a bath. She merely wanted him to start thinking about taking his bath. She would have fainted dead away if he had responded to her empty command. Approximately 10 minutes later, Mom speaks again. "Now, Henry, it's getting later and you have school tomorrow. I want those toys picked up and then I want you in that tub." She still does not expect Henry to obey, and he knows it. Her real message is, "We're getting closer, Hank." Henry shuffles around and stacks a box or two to demonstrate that he heard her. Then he settles down for a few more minutes of play. 6 minutes pass and Mom issues another command, this time with more passion and threat in her voice. "Now listen, young man, I told you to get a move on, and I meant it. To Henry, this means he must get his toys picked up and meander toward the bathroom door. If his mother rapidly pursues him, then he must carry out the assignment post-haste. However, if Mom's mind wanders before she performs the last step of this ritual, or if the phone miraculously rings, Henry is free to enjoy a few minutes reprieve." You see, Henry and his mother are involved in a familiar one-act play. They both know the rules and the role being enacted by the opposite actor. The entire scene is programmed, pre-programmed, scripted, and computerized. It's a virtual replay of a scenario that occurs night after night. Whenever Mom wants Henry to do something he dislikes, she progresses through graduated steps of phony anger, beginning with calmness and ending with a red flush and threats. Henry does not have to move until she reaches her flash point, which signals that she's ready to do something about it. How foolish this game is. Since Mom controls Henry with empty threats, she must stay half irritated all the time. Her relationship with her children is contaminated, and she ends each day with a pulsing headache. She can never count on instant obedience because it takes her at least 20 or 30 minutes to work up a believable degree of anger. How much better is it to use action to achieve the desired behavior and avoid the emotional outburst? Hundreds of approaches will bring a desired response. Some involve minor pain, others offer a reward to a less naughty child. When a parent's calm request for obedience is ignored by a child, Mom or Dad should have some means of making their youngster want to cooperate. For those who can think of no such device, I'll suggest one. There is a muscle snugly against the base of the neck, anatomy books list it as the trapezius muscle, and when firmly squeezed, it sends little messengers to the brain saying this hurts, avoid recurrence at all costs. The pain is only temporary. It can cause no damage the way I'm suggesting its use. But it is amazingly effective and practical recourse for parents when their youngster ignores a direct command to move. Let's return to the bedroom scene with Henry and suggest how it could have been replayed more effectively. To begin, his mother should have forewarned him that he had 15 more minutes to play. No one, child or adult, likes a sudden interruption of his activity. It then would have been wise to set the alarm clock or the stove buzzer. When the 15 minutes passed and the buzzer sounded, Mom should have quietly told Henry to go take his bath. If he didn't move immediately, she could have taken Henry's face in her hands, looked him straight in the eye, and said with conviction but not with frustration, "Do it now. Do you understand?" If the lad believes in his heart of hearts that she's prepared to punish him for delaying, no punishment will be necessary. If Henry learns that this procedure or some other unpleasantness is invariably visited upon him in such a moment, he will move before the consequences ensue. Authority, you see, is a subtle thing. It is conveyed mostly by confidence and determination, and sometimes a little bluster. As for the use of punishment, I know that some readers could argue that the deliberate, premeditated application of minor pain to a small child is harsh and an unloving thing to do. Others, it will seem like pure barbarism. I obviously disagree. Given a choice between a harassed, screaming, threatening mother who blows up several times a day and a mom who has a reasonable, controlled response to disobedience, I would certainly recommend the latter. In the long run, the quieter home is better for Henry because of the avoidance of strife between generations. On the other hand, when a youngster discovers that there is no threat behind the millions of words he hears, he stops listening to them. The only messages he responds to are those reaching a peak of emotion, which means much screaming and yelling. The child is pulling in the opposite direction, fraying mom's nerves and straining the parent-child relationship. In the absence of action early in the conflict, the parent usually ends up punishing anyway. The consequences are also more likely to be severe because by then the adult is irritated and out of control. And instead of the discipline being administered in a calm and judicious manner, the parent has become unnerved and frustrated, swinging wildly at the belligerent child. There is no reason for a fight to have occurred. The situation could have ended very differently if mom had exhibited an attitude of confident authority. Let's get back to Henry and his mother. Speaking softly, almost pleasantly, Mom says, "You know what happens when you don't mind me. Now I don't see any reason why I should have to make you uncomfortable just to get your cooperation tonight. But if you insist, I'll play the game with you. When the buzzer sounds, you let me know what the decision is." The child then has the choice to make, and the advantages to him of obeying his mother's wishes are clear. She need not scream. She need not threaten to shorten his life. She need not become upset. She is in command. Of course, mother will have to prove 2 or 3 times that she will apply the pain or other punishment if necessary. Occasionally throughout the coming months, Henry will check to see if she is still at the helm. That question is easily answered. Understanding the interaction between Henry and his mother can be very helpful to parents who have become screamers and don't know why. Let's look at their relationship during that difficult evening as diagrammed in figure 3. Note that Henry's mother greets him at the front door after school, which represents the low point of irritation. From that time forward, however, her emotion builds and intensifies until it reaches a moment of explosion at the end of the day. By her ultimate display of anger at bedtime, Mom makes it clear to Henry that she's through warning and is now ready to take definite action. You see, most parents, even those who are very permissive, have a point on the scale beyond which they will not be pushed. Inevitable punishment looms immediately across that line. The amazing thing about children is that they know precisely where their parents draw the line. We adults reveal our particular points of action to them in at least 6 or 8 subtle ways. Only those moments do we use their middle names, Jessica, Emily, Smith, get in the tub, or our speech becomes more staccato and abrupt. Young lady, I told you. Our faces turn red, an important clue. We jump from our chair and the child knows it is time to cooperate. It's all a game. to them. The other interesting thing about children is that having identified the circumstances that immediately precede disciplinary action, they will take their parents directly to that barrier and bump it repeatedly, but will seldom go beyond it deliberately. Once or twice, Henry will ignore his mother's emotional fireworks just to see if she has the courage to deliver on her promise. When that question has been answered, he will do what she demands in the nick of time to avoid punishment. Now, this brings us to the punchline of this important discussion. I must admit that what I'm about to write is difficult to express and may not be fully understood by my readers. It may, however, be of value to parents who want to stop fighting with their children. I've said that parental anger often signals to a child that the parents have reached their action line. Therefore, children obey, albeit reluctantly. Only when mom and dad get mad, indicating that they will now resort to punishment. On the other hand, the parents observe that the child's surrender occurs simultaneously with their anger and inaccurately conclude that their emotional explosion is what forced the youngster to yield. Thus, their anger seems necessary for control in the future. They have grossly misunderstood the situation. Returning one more time to the story of Henry, remembering that his mother tells him repeatedly to take his bath, only when she blows up does he get in the tub, leading her to believe that her anger produced the obedience. She is wrong. It was not her anger that sent Henry to the tub. It was the action he believed to be imminent. I'm going to repeat that again. It was not her anger that sent Henry to the tub. It was the action he believed to be imminent following her anger. Her anger was nothing more than a tip-off that mom was frustrated enough to spank his bottom. Henry cares about that. I've written this entire chapter in order to convey this one message. You do not need anger to control children. You do need strategic action. Furthermore, you can apply the action anywhere on the timeline that is convenient, and children will live contentedly within that boundary. In fact, the closer the action moves to the front of the conflict, the less punishment is required, and the less often it is necessary. A squeeze of the trapezius muscle is not a sufficient deterrent at the end of a 2-hour struggle, whereas it is more than adequate when the conflict is minimal. Incidentally, I do not recommend that mothers weighing fewer than 120 pounds squeeze the shoulder muscles of their big teenagers. There are definite risks involved in that procedure. The general rule to follow is, if you can't reach it, don't squeeze it. We do not need anger to control children. We need strategic action. In this next section, I'll be reading Dr. James Dobson's response to why sometimes fathers receive a response for their children more than their mothers. I've had many mothers say to me over the years, I don't understand my kids. They will do exactly what their father demands, but they won't mind me at all. There may be several reasons for this differential. First, fathers can be much more intimidating than mothers just by their presence. The fact is that dads are often much bigger physically and have a deeper voice as a way of encouraging a child to respond more quickly to their discipline. Second, children often look to their father for approval, and when he expresses his disappointment to them, they take more to heart. Fun and most pertinent here, because mothers usually spend more time with their children, they often get worn down and stop following through with discipline. When that's the case, children are bright enough to notice that dad draws his action line earlier than mom, and they'll behave accordingly. There's another factor. Children often understand these forces better than their parents, who are bogged down with adult responsibilities and worries. This is why so many kids are able to win the contest of wills. They devote their primary effort to the game, while we grown-ups play only when we must. One father overheard his 5-year-old daughter Laura saying to her little sister, who was doing something wrong, I'm going to tell mommy on you. No, I'll tell daddy, he's worse. Laura had evaluated the disciplinary measures of her two parents and concluded that one was more effective than the other. This same child was observed by her father to have become especially disobedient and defiant. She was irritating other family members and looking for ways to avoid minding her parents. Her dad decided not to confront her directly about this change in behavior, but to punish her consistently for every offense until she settled down. For 3 or 4 days, He let Laura get away with nothing. She was spanked, stood in the corner, and sent to her bedroom. And the conclusion of the fourth day, she was sitting on the bed with her father and younger sister. Without provocation, Laura pulled the hair of the toddler who was looking at a book. Her dad promptly took action and disciplined her. Laura did not cry, but sat in silence for a moment or two. And then she said, all of my tricks are not working. Children really understand more than we believe they do and more than they let on to do. Notice how Laura was able to draw conclusions about who was more effective in getting her to obey. Don't underestimate your child. In this next session, we'll be nailing home, unfortunately, some of the lengths that children can go in terms of manipulating their parents when it comes to obeying and listening. This story was very eye-opening for me, and I believe it will for you too. Take a listen. If you think back to your own childhood years, you may remember similar events in which the disciplinary techniques of adults were consciously analyzed and their weaknesses probed. When I was a child, I once spent the night with a rambunctious friend who seemed to know every move his parents were going to make. Earl was like a military general who had deciphered the enemy code, permitting him to outmaneuver his opponents at every turn. After we were tucked into our own twin beds that night, he gave me an astounding description of his father's temper. Earl said, when my dad gets angry, he usually says some really bad words that would amaze you. He listed 3 or 4 startling examples. I replied, I don't believe it. Mr. Walker was a very tall, reserved Christian man who seemed to have it all together. I just couldn't conceive of him saying the words Earl had quoted. Want me to prove it to you? Earl said mischievously. All we have to do is keep on laughing and talking instead of going to sleep. My dad would come and tell us to be quiet over and over, and he'll get madder and madder every time he has to settle us down. Then you'll hear the cuss words, just wait and see. I was a bit dubious about the plan, but I did want to see the dignified Mr. Walker at his profane best. So Earl and I kept his poor father running back and forth like a yo-yo for over an hour. And as predicted, he became more intense and hostile each time he returned to our bedroom. I was getting very nervous and would have called off the demonstration, but Earl had been through it all before. He kept telling me it won't be long now. Finally, about midnight, it happened. Mr. Walker's patience expired. He came thundering down the hall toward our room, shaking the entire house as his feet pounded the floor. He burst through the bedroom door and leaped on Earl's bed, flailing away at the boy, who was safely buried beneath 3 or 4 layers of blankets. Then from his lips came a stream of words that had seldom reached my tender ears. I was shocked, but Earl was delighted. Even when his father was whacking the covers with his hand and screaming profanities, Earl raised up and shouted to me, "Did you hear him? Huh? Didn't I tell you? I told you he would say it." It's a wonder that Mr. Walker didn't kill his son at that moment. I lay awake that night thinking about the episode and made up my mind never to let a child manipulate me like that when I grew up. Don't you see how important disciplinary techniques are to a child's respect for his parents? When a 45-pound bundle of trouble can deliberately reduce his mother and father to a trembling, snarling mass of frustration, then something changes in the relationship. Something precious is lost. The child develops an attitude of contempt that is certain to erupt during the stormy adolescent years to come. I sincerely wish every adult understood that simple characteristic of human nature. It's my responsibility to wrap this message up by bringing up the overarching theme that I believe runs through Dr. James Dobson's book, which is to maintain balance between love and control. We must be careful to not become parents who at every act of disobedience react very harshly to our children's disobedience. You as a parent must use sound judgment and understand when certain situations call for you using positive reinforcement or evaluating maybe your child is just having a hard day. There are other factors playing into this behavior: lack of sleep, hunger, and how to properly go about navigating that. Sometimes that may just be, especially with a toddler, distracting them, changing up the routine. You know what best benefits your child, but it's important that you don't become an overbearing dictator, which in the same effect can accomplish what the angry physical and verbal outbursts accomplish, which is a fraying between the relationship between you and your child. In this last section, Dr. James Dobson perfectly ties together this understanding that runs through his book. I've affectionately dubbed this section of the book Bud Linden Swim School and Coach Ayers. I've met a few Willie grown-ups who had a great ability to lead kids. One of them lived near us in Arcadia, California. He owned and operated Bud Linden Swim School and had a remarkable comprehension of the principles of discipline. I enjoyed sitting poolside just to watch the man work. However, there are few child developmentalists who could explain why he was so successful with the little swimmers in his pool. He was not soft and delicate in his manner. In fact, he tended to be somewhat gruff. When the kids got out of line, he splashed water in their faces and said sternly, "Who told you to move? Stay where I put you until I ask you to swim." He called the boys men of tomorrow and other pet names. His class was regimented and every minute was utilized purposely. But would you believe it? The children loved Bud Linden. Why? Because they knew he loved them. Within his gruff manner was a message of affection that might escape the adult observer. Mr. Linden never embarrassed a child intentionally, and he covered for the youngster who swam poorly. He delicately balanced his authority with a subtle affection that attracted children like the Pied Piper. Mr. Bud Linden understood the meaning of discipline with love. When I was in 9th grade, I had an athletic coach who affected me the same way. He was the master of the moment and no one dared challenge his authority. I would have fought wild lions before tackling Mr. Ayers. Yes, I feared him. We all did, but he never abused his power. He treated me courteously and respectfully at a time when I needed all the dignity I could get. Combined with this acceptance of the individual was an obvious self-confidence and ability to lead a pack of adolescent wolves who had devoured less capable teachers. And that's why my 9th grade gym coach had a greater influence on me than any other person during my 15th year. Mr. Craig Ayers understood discipline with love. Not all parents can be like Mr. Linden or Mr. Ayers, and I would not suggest that they try. Nor would it be wise for a parent at home to display the same gruffness that is appropriate on the athletic field or at the pool. Parents must fit their disciplinary approach to their own personality patterns and the responses that feel natural. However, the overriding principle remains the same for men, women, mothers and fathers, coaches and teachers, pediatricians and psychologists. It involves discipline with love, a reasonable introduction to responsibility and self-control, parental leadership with a minimum of anger, respect for the dignity and worth of the child, realistic boundaries that enforce with confident firmness, and a judicious use of rewards and punishments to those who challenge and resist. It is a system that bears the approval of the Creator himself. That completes and wraps up Chapter 6 of Dr. James Dobson's Strong-Willed Child, the Revised Version. At the end of each chapter in the Revised Version, Dr. James Dobson actually included Q&As where people who previously read the first version of the book when it was first released and still had lingering questions, he answered them, included them in the Revised Version. I'm sure that by now, listening to Dr. James Dobson, if you feel any way that I felt, there's a part of you that feels like that was not enough and you desire to go get his book. There's an incentive to get the Revised Version if you'd like that additional information. I personally made sure to read each Q&A on top of the regular chapter readings, and I learned even more. And it was wonderful to see people ask, more specific questions about their particular circumstances and how he was able to give very sound and doable advice that could be worked into people's everyday lives, on the go, whatever. I also must mention that within this book, The Strong-Willed Child, whether or not you have a strong-willed child or just going through a heavy crazy phase in your child's life where they're just not getting it and you can't seem to get through to them, Dr. James Dobson also has a chapter on adolescence, a chapter on dealing with a child who has ADHD. He has a chapter on physical discipline. He lays out a very sound, loving, and respectful way to incorporate discipline into your life as a parent that is not abusive and still respects the integrity and worth of a child, plus many other things in this book. I also feel that it's necessary to mention these books of his. He has Bringing Up Boys, which sold over 2 million copies, as well as Bringing Up Girls as well. If you want a specified approach to bringing up your individual child based off of what gender, sex that they are, because each one will present different challenges and you need the wisdom to be able to maneuver them as such. You would not advise a girl in the same way that you would advise a boy on certain subjects. I want to take a minute before I close out this video to share real quick the reality of what the Lord did for me. Me and my husband were going through a time where our oldest son, 4 years old, was really becoming rambunctious and out of hand. It felt as though every response to get him to listen or just to obey simple requests and commands needed to turn into a full brawl. And I remember day in and day out feeling exhausted and honestly becoming very sad and discouraged because I was beginning to resent my child in a lot of ways. Praying to the Lord and saying, God, listen, I know I need your help. I know that you have solutions to everything. And the Lord is so good, you guys. I'm going to take a moment before I finish saying this to say this. You and your partner, whether you're a single parent or whether you are a wife or a father, you are not alone in parenting your child. Your parent has 3 parents. The world has chosen not to acknowledge the third and most important parent in the parent-child relationship with your children and all the children of the world. But he is the best parent. With that being said, following the continuation of this story, one day after many of these episodes, my son had a day where he was going into the closet, pulling out things and throwing them around. And he proceeded to pull out this book that had been given to me by someone at my church. And he was just tossing the book around back and forth. And one day when I was cleaning up the house and tidying up the living room, putting everything back, I came across the book and I was about to pick it up and put it back into the closet with the rest of the books and items that aren't out at the moment because I'm not actively using them. And I just looked at the book and I was like, oh my gosh, Holy Spirit, how far be it from me to literally receive the answer. You literally had my own son, the son I'm having the issues with, pull out the exact solution as an answer to my prayer. And from that day forward, I picked up this book and began to walk out and apply everything that I read in it, along with the biblical concepts and views that Dr. Dobson incorporates into the book concerning rearing children. And my experience completely changed. And it was in that process that the Lord encouraged me. He gave me a direct order to share this solution that he presented to me to present it to you today. As we close out this video, mom and dad, you're not alone. Welcome in God the Father, the Holy Spirit into every area of your parenting. And there will be days where even the expertise of people like Dr. James Dobson will not suffice. You'll need the Holy Spirit who has the ability to adjust and give you the correct wisdom, knowledge, and correct ways of applying the applications as your child goes through different phases. The Holy Spirit never loses track of what phase they're in or what they're going through, and he has the ability to give you insight and understanding to your particular child's needs and what is really going on, because oftentimes what's going on the surface is nothing compared to what is at the root of the issue. And the Holy Spirit, the revealer, the counselor, the helper, can help you do that today. If this video was helpful for you, if you know as a parent that you felt vindicated, seen, relieved, and were given real tools to approach the situations and circumstances that you're facing within your own family, share it. Forget sharing it. Directly send it text it to your fellow friend and parent that you know needs this resource, needs to listen to this soundbite, so they're encouraged to go ahead and go pick up one of James Dobson's books on one of the very subject matters that he covers. He has more books than I shared with you today, but for the sake of the video, I kept it at a minimum. Do that. Don't be someone who it stops at you. Be a conduit. Be someone who ushers people into answers. If there was any particular section that you loved or stood out to you, probably some of the ones that I loved, feel free to comment those and share them down below. With that being said, it was a pleasure. I'll see you next time. Take care.